You've always felt it, not in her words, but in the silence between them, not in her touch, but in the way her eyes hesitate just before they meet yours, as if rehearsing a response to a question you never asked. There's a moment you keep returning to, though you never remember when it first happened. A look, a smile, a gesture that felt warm, but never quite real, as if she was acting from a script written long before you arrived. And in that moment, you wanted to believe that this was care, that this was softness, that this was love. But something deeper in you, ancient, watching, never believed it. It only observed the tilt of her voice when you were weak, the calculation in her kindness, the way her gentleness emerged only when it was safe, never when it was costly. You feel the wound not where she hurt you, but where you pretended she didn't. She isn't who you think she is, and perhaps neither are you. Now, look again, but this time, do not blink. You thought you were seen, but you were only used as a surface, a face on which she could project her hunger for meaning, not meet yours. You were not loved for your being, you were selected for your function, and every time she smiled at your strength, what she adored was her own reflection dressed in your mask. She does not love you, she loves how she looks when she is near you. You are her mirror, not her man. The moment you break that illusion, when you suffer, when you fail, when your edges show, she recoils. Not because she is cruel, but because the mirror cracked, and the image she needed dissolved. You believed her gaze was compassion, but it was a ritual, a transaction, a rehearsed empathy carved from ancestral instinct. When you wept, she flinched, not because your tears wounded her, but because they disrupted the myth she was performing. You were never allowed to be real. You were required to be symbolic. Your strength made her feel chosen. Your confidence made her feel divine. But the moment your shadow appeared, the trembling hand, the silent doubt, the fracture behind your eyes, the spell broke. And in that instant, she no longer knew who you were, because she had never bothered to know. She craves a man who contains the archetype, not the individual, the hero, not the wounded one, the knight, not the child. She falls in love with symbols, not souls. And you fed her that symbol. You polished it, maintained it, offered yourself to her gaze like a cathedral to a worshipper, hoping she would kneel not out of awe, but out of real devotion. But the more perfect your image became, the more imprisoned your soul grew, because every gesture she adored was a mask you wore to survive her expectations. She asks for honesty, but not too much, vulnerability, but not if it drips, depth, but only if it flatters her dream. Your truth is only welcome as long as it doesn't disturb hers. You weren't manipulated, you were devoured, not with fangs, but with reverence. And you mistook that reverence for love, not knowing it was a hunger disguised as grace. You remember how she looked at you when you succeeded, the light in her eyes, the pride in her voice, and you remember how that light dimmed when you faltered, not because you were weak, but because you stopped being useful to the story she told herself. You feel ashamed of needing her kindness, ashamed of crying when your father died, ashamed of the silence that followed your confession. That shame was not born in you. It was given to you, gifted gently, sweetly, with a warm touch that said, "I'm here," while her soul whispered, "Only if you stay beautiful." She called you her rock, but rocks don't bleed, rocks don't break, rocks don't need. And so when you shattered inside, you did so in silence, because even your collapse had to be invisible. She wanted your presence, but not your chaos. Your hand, not your heart. Your guidance, not your grief. She did not want the whole of you, she wanted the half that served her myth. This is the shadow of the anima, the image of woman not as she is. But as she appears in dreams, radiant, soothing, receptive, but look closely, and you will see the shadow behind the veil, the devouring mother, the manipulative maiden, the seductress who does not love you but the story you let her play inside. You think she is soft, but softness can be armor, a velvet glove over an ancient instinct. She has learned to be tender when it gets her what she wants. She has learned that tears disarm, that passivity can dominate, that to appear yielding is to control without blame. This is not evil. This is unconscious. She does not know what she is doing. She calls it love. She believes it. And maybe part of her means it. But deeper than her words is her need, the archetypal hunger to be completed, and the terror of having to face the abyss without a mask. And so she reaches for your mask, kisses it, praises it, builds a life around it, but never asks who is behind it, because if she did, she would have to question her entire reflection. You dreamt of a woman who would see you and not the idea of you, who would love you when you had no words, no answers, no strength, who would sit in your silence without needing to rescue you from it. But that woman lives in the unconscious. She is not born, she must be conjured. What you met instead was a mirror, and every time you looked into it, hoping for recognition, you were reflected back a version of yourself sculpted by her desires. She did not mean to lie, but her love was a performance, and you were the stage. You did not lose her, you lost the illusion that she was ever fully there, and that loss bitter, invisible. Quiet is the beginning of your descent, not into despair, but into the underworld of your own myth. You must descend to find the part of you that no longer needs her compassion to feel real. You must see that what she called love was often a form of surveillance, a way to manage your power, a way to feel safe in your dominance. As long as that dominance obeyed her silent contract, she rewarded your performance, not your essence, and in doing so, she taught you to betray yourself. Now the mask is cracking, and she will not weep for it. She will simply look away, because it was never your truth she wanted. It was her reflection in your glory. But now you see, now you know. The mirror devours the gaze, and if you stare long enough, you lose your eyes. She did not love you. She loved the feeling of being lovable when you looked at her that way. So ask yourself if she had met the part of you that trembles, the part that doubts, the part that weeps when no one is watching, would she have stayed? Would she have reached for you or recoiled? Would she have loved the whole of you, or only the version that let her stay untouched by your pain? You know the answer, not because you're cruel, but because you remember the silence, and silence never lies. Not hers, not yours, not now. She never raised her voice. She didn't need to. You mistook her calm for grace, her passivity for purity, her gentleness for innocence. But beneath her silence was calculation, not the cold kind that plots, but the ancient kind that survives. She has always known how to bend without breaking, how to yield without surrendering, how to seem soft while swallowing the room. When she cried, you moved. When she withdrew, you chased. When she smiled again, you forgave. You thought it was love, but it was training. She never told you to obey, she simply made you fear her absence. She fed you her pain like a sacrament, and you drank it as if it made you holy. Her sadness became your purpose, her needs, your compass. You stopped asking what you wanted. You stopped speaking when it wasn't safe, and slowly, so gently, your own voice withered beneath the weight of her quiet hunger. She called herself fragile, but fragility can be a weapon. What breaks can control, what needs rescue can command. The more delicate she appeared, the more you hardened to protect her, and in protecting her, you abandoned yourself. You believed that compassion would heal her, but she did not want healing, she wanted gravity. She needed you to orbit her wounds, not lift her from them, because her pain was power, and you, desperate to be a good man, a strong man, a noble man, fell into her gravity like a priest into confession. The wolf wears a white veil. You didn't see the teeth, because you were trained to fear the roar, not the whimper. But power does not always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives in the shape of helplessness. Sometimes it is soft. Sometimes it is sweet. Sometimes it says, "I'm scared," and in doing so, conquers you. She never asked for dominance. She made you offer it, made you feel like the protector, the guide, the steady one. But it was her gravity that kept you spinning, her silence that dictated your speech, her moods that structured your days. And still, you called her loving. She told you she had been hurt before, that men had used her, betrayed her, left her, and in your desire to be different, you gave her everything, not realizing she had weaponized that pain, not consciously, not with malice, but with myth. She had built an identity from victimhood, and you became the stage on which that identity could be performed safely. You thought you were healing her, you were completing a story, but it was not your story. You were cast as the savior in a drama written long before you arrived. And if you dared to break character, if you expressed needs of your own, shadows of your own, you threatened the whole narrative. So you stopped, you bit your tongue, you carried her, you absorbed her storms and called it strength, but inside, you began to vanish. You mistook dependency for intimacy, mistook softness for sincerity, mistook surrender for connection. But her surrender was not to you, it was to control. You were not loving a woman. You were feeding an archetype. The anima in shadow is not gentle. She seduces not with lust, but with need. She does not scream, she flutters. She does not strike, she folds. And in her folds, you lose yourself. She made you feel essential, and in doing so, made you afraid to leave. That fear was not love, it was enchantment. And every enchanted man begins to rot beneath his own armor. You began to say less, to smile more, to adapt before the tension rose. You knew her patterns, knew when to hold her, when to say nothing, when to speak sweetly even when your insides burned. You stopped being a man, you became an emotional butler, a nervous system built to stabilize her narrative, and she called you safe. But safety should not cost your soul. The wolf wears a white veil, and beneath that veil is not a monster but something far more dangerous, the unconscious, the unexamined, the archetype playing itself out without restraint. She is not evil, she is possessed by a cultural inheritance that teaches her her wounds are holy, her needs divine, her suffering sacred. She does not seek truth, she seeks emotional obedience. She does not want your soul, she wants your loyalty. You are not a man to her, you are a supplier of attention, of stability, of symbolic meaning. And when you can no longer provide, she will not rage, she will collapse. And in that collapse, she will blame you. You thought you were strong, but your strength was spent keeping her from falling apart. You thought you were loving, but your love became a leash tied to a vanishing self. She made you feel like a hero, but only in her story. And when you stopped fitting the script, she called you cold, distant, unsafe. You weren't. You were just waking up. And waking up costs everything. You must see it clearly now. She was not sent to complete you. She was sent to show you the part of you that still needed to be worshipped for being good, still needed to be needed, still believed that protecting meant disappearing. She is not your enemy, but she is not your home, because home is where the soul breathes and you have been holding your breath since the beginning. You weren't tricked, you were trained by stories, by culture, by the myth of the selfless man and the wholly wounded woman. But myths become prisons when no one dares to rewrite them. Now you must rewrite, not with words, but with silence, with space, with refusal, with the quiet, shattering act of no longer giving what is not returned. Do not seek vengeance. Do not seek to expose her. She does not know what she's doing. She believes her veil is real. But you must know better. You must step out of her orbit and reclaim the gravity of your own soul. The wolf wears a white veil. She smiles as she feeds, and when you starve, she mourns not for you, but for the silence left behind. Let her mourn, let her hunger, let her dance alone in the role she created, but do not feed it again. Because to love her truly, you must refuse her illusion, and in that refusal, you become real again. You thought you were entering warmth. You thought it was sanctuary, a return, a home, a promise to be held. But the deeper you stepped into her tenderness, the more disoriented you became. It did not open it enclosed. It did not nurture it entangled. She wrapped you in her softness, and in that softness, you forgot the sound of your own name. The womb is a labyrinth, not a shelter, but a maze, and once inside, the way out disappears. You are fed love like nectar. Your strength is praised, your presence is honored, and yet you are shrinking. She calls it devotion, but it is domestication. She wants you close not because she sees you, but because she fears the space you create when you are distant. Her affection is not freedom, it is surveillance. It is intimacy sharpened into control. She gives you her heart, but always on the condition that you remain within her map. You tried to stay whole, but she did not want your wholeness. She wanted your loyalty. You tried to speak your truth, but she heard betrayal in every word she could not control. This is not a woman. This is the archetype of the great mother in shadow, the one who protects by possession, who loves by absorption, who gives by demanding in return the death of your edges. She offers you her vulnerability, but only if it makes you kneel. Her tenderness is real, but it's also a thread that pulls you deeper into the story she cannot stop retelling. She does not want you to wake up. She wants you to stay dreaming with her, to stay inside the mirror where you make her feel complete. She says you are safe here, but safety in her world means silence. No questions, no doubt, no desire that does not orbit hers. You learn to walk gently, to monitor your tone, to read her moods like omens, to soften your truth until it could pass through the narrow gate of her comfort. And so, piece by piece, you disappeared. She says she wants connection, but connection, to her, is compliance. She wants your heart, but only if it beats in rhythm with hers. She wants your soul, but only the parts that flatter her own. Every time you tried to leave the maze with a boundary, with a need, with a raw and honest no, she wept, and you returned. Not because you were weak, but because you believed her pain was proof of love. But love does not ask you to die in order to stay. Her womb is not sanctuary, it is mythology. You were not the first man she welcomed into that softness. You were the next one who tried to rescue her, only to find himself drowning. She told you she had been broken. You believed it. You offered healing. But the moment your healing required her to change, she turned away, because change means risk, and risk means no longer being adored unconditionally. So she retreats into sadness, into silence, into the unspoken weapon of emotional exile. And you raised to be good, raised to make women feel safe, you return. Again and again, and again, until the mirror is dust, until your hands no longer remember how to hold without trembling. You were told that women want kindness, presence, understanding, and so you offered them. But what she truly wanted was influence, security, an emotional architecture in which she could play the role of muse, healer, goddess, child. She wanted to be needed but never to need. She wanted to be held but never to hold. She wanted to be followed but never to lead. And still, she calls it love, and still, you called it sacred. But sacred things do not require you to vanish. The womb is a labyrinth, and every turn feels like progress. Every kiss feels like redemption. Every tear feels like proof. Until you wake one morning and realize you no longer recognize your own voice. This is not her fault. This is a pattern, a dream she inherited from women who were praised only when they were beautiful, loved only when they were silent, safe only when they were useful. And in that dream, she learned how to survive by becoming the very myth that devours both lover and beloved. But you are not here to stay in the dream. You are here to break it. You must let her cry, let her blame, let her call you heartless when you no longer play your part. Let her retreat into her labyrinth and call it depth. But do not follow. You will be tempted. She will whisper that you are abandoning her, that you are just like the rest, that your love was never real, and part of you will ache, because part of you still believes that to be a man is to bleed silently beside a woman's suffering. But that is not love. That is martyrdom. That is servitude in a palace of shadows. If you love her, you will leave the labyrinth. You will tear off the mask she fell in love with. You will refuse to be her symbol. You will become yourself even if that means she no longer sees you as a hero. And if she loves you, truly loves you, she will awaken. She will meet you at the edge, without the veil, without the script, without the myth. But that is her path, not yours to force. Your path is through the silence, through the hunger, through the ache of becoming whole without her reflection to confirm you. You were not born to be consumed. You were not born to be worshipped for your usefulness. You were not born to die slowly in a softness that poisons. You were born to see, to walk, to breathe the air beyond the myth. Now you must choose. Stay in the womb and forget your name, or walk out and face the light that does not flatter, but freeze. You will lose her, or at least the version of her that needed your sacrifice to feel loved. But in that loss, you will find the one thing she could never give you, yourself. Somewhere, a mirror cracks, no sound, just the slow shiver of an image dissolving. She still stands there veiled, radiant, waiting, but you are no longer reflected. Only emptiness remains, not absence, not loss, but the raw, untamed face of a man who no longer needs to be seen to exist. She will call out, not with words, but with silence, and you will feel it like a memory trying to return. But you will not turn back. You will walk without costume, without title, without the soft chains of meaning she once offered as love. And perhaps, one day, the true woman will meet you there, naked of myth, silent of need, unknown, real. But until then, the echo remains. The labyrinth is behind you. The hunger is not yours.